Syria reiterates commitment to agreement on disengagement demands ending the Israeli occupation of Golan. Units of the Syrian armed forces continue to launch successful military operations against the terrorist organization in several areas across the country, inflicting heavy losses upon them. And Syria's envoy to the UN says the Syrian government is a key part of combating terrorism of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra. And the United Nations Security Council calls for enhancing support for Iraq in face of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria and expresses unconditional support for the UNDOF mission in Syrian Arab Golan. And in Russia, Moscow does not expect invitations to join the International Alliance Against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria terrorist organization. Good afternoon, this is news in English from the Syrian Arab Television in Damascus. The Foreign and Expatriates Ministry sent two identical letters to the United Nations Secretary General and the Security Council Chairman on the stances of the Syrian government regarding the Secretary General's latest report on the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force, UNDOF, which monitors a disengagement accord established in 1974 between Syria and the Israeli occupation, which occupies the Syrian Golan. The letters included the ministry saying that the Syrian government reiterates its commitment to its obligations under the agreement of disengagement. The ministry stressed that Israel's help and support for terrorists from Jabhat al-Nusra and other terrorist organizations in terms of logistics and intelligence does not only constitute a breach of the 1974 disengagement accord, but also poses a danger on the regional security and peace, as well as the safety and security of the United Nations personnel. The statement stressed that out of its keenness to remain committed to its obligations, Syria is showing absolute self-restraint in the process of confronting the acts carried out by the armed terrorist groups in the area where the UNDOF operates. In a related context, the United Nations Security Council expressed unconditional support for the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force in the Syrian Arab Golan. The Council adopted a presidential statement in which it affirmed that UNDOF's mission constitutes a very vital factor for peace and security in the Middle East region. The statement denounced the recent attacks launched against UNDOF soldiers, demanding terrorist organizations to leave the positions they entered and return the vehicles, weapons and ammunition they seized from the Fijian soldiers who were kidnapped last month. The United Nations Security Council also called for enhancing and expanding support to Iraq in face of the Islamic State in Iraq and the Sham ISIS and the armed organizations affiliated to it. In a statement adopted by the Council during a ministerial meeting on Iraq held with the participation of 40 countries, the Council condemned the attacks launched by terrorist organizations in Iraq, Syria and Lebanon, including the ISIS, affirming that this large scale attack is a major threat to the region. Syria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Dr. Bashar al-Jafari, said that some of the interpositions deviated from the provisions under consideration, which is the situation in Iraq as it's stated in the agenda, talking about the situation in Syria in a wrong and provocative way, which is not suitable at all, particularly with regard to combating ISIS. In a statement during the meeting, al-Jafari indicated that some of the deliberations regrettably sought to distract the attention from the main issue discussed during the session, which is helping the Iraqi and Syrian governments and peoples confront ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra and other terrorist organizations affiliated to them, according to resolution number 2170, stressing that the Syrian government is a key part of combating the terrorism of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra. Al-Jafari stressed that Syria has been combating this terrorism over the past 3 years, and we have always insisted on the importance of combating it and halting its financing and armament or training its members, Al-Jafari, indicated that Syria is very pleased that the international community acknowledged the existence of terrorism, which is backed by some governments and mass media, and that there are camps for training terrorists, some of which are in Syria's neighboring countries, adding that the identity of those who back terrorism is intentionally hidden. He affirmed that combating terrorism must be done in the framework of the United Nations Charter and the principles of the international law, on top of which respecting the sovereignty of the countries, which definitely requires previous coordination with the Syrian government in any serious effort to combat terrorism. Russia affirmed that Moscow does not expect invitations for it to join the international alliance against the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant ISIS, the terrorist organization, but will continue its aid to Iraq, Syria, and other nations who are fighting terrorists on the spot. Ilya Rogovich, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry's Department for New Challenges and Threats, said that Russia will continue to support all states that fight the Islamic State. He added that Russia is ready to help all ISIS opponents, including members of the coalition being formed by the United States, but under the condition that they stop using double standards and remain within the framework of international law. The Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif asserted that the risk of the terrorist organization threatening the whole world, pointing out that it is wrong to believe that they could get rid of ISIS through supporting other terrorist organizations, whereas he said concerning the nuclear issue that if the other side was ready to take hard decisions, then it would be possible to reach an agreement before the coming November 24th. Units of the armed forces launched a wide-scale military operation towards Sadr al-Balad in Damascus countryside and cordoned off the town, eliminating large numbers of terrorists and destroying their criminal equipment. Army units also targeted gatherings of terrorists in the areas of Al-Rawda Street in Khan Sheikh Farms and Al-Hindi Farm in the countryside, leaving many terrorists dead and others wounded. In Dar'a, army units killed and injured many terrorists and destroyed their vehicles in Dar'a southern province. A military source said that army units targeted gatherings of terrorists in the surrounding of Manshalat al-Hajar in Ataman town and in the surrounding of Khirbat Ghazali in the countryside of the province, leaving a number of them dead and injured. The source added that a unit of the armed forces killed many terrorists and destroyed a car equipped with a heavy machine gun that they were using in the town of Deir al-Adas in the countryside. 3 cars were also destroyed to the south of Busr al-Harir in the eastern countryside, and all the terrorists on board were killed. Army units continue to target the hideouts of terrorist organizations stationed in Jobar, Damascus countryside. Scores of terrorists were eliminated during the attacks. Army units eliminated a number of terrorists and destroyed their hideouts and gatherings in the northern and eastern countryside of Hama city. A military source said that army units eliminated terrorists of the areas of Al-Latamni, Murik, Kafr Zeta, and Zakat in Hama northern countryside, destroying their ammunition depots. And in Old Homs, an army unit seized a warehouse that was used by terrorist organizations to store weapons in Al-Hamidiyya neighborhood. Raw materials for making explosive devices and Saudi Turkish-made weapons were found in the warehouse. Also in the countryside of Idlib, the units of the Syrian Arab Army eliminated huge numbers of terrorists and destroyed their weaponry. A unit from the Syrian Arab Army targeted a terrorist gathering near Benish, killing and injuring lots of them, while other units of the Syrian army destroyed a hideout that includes a manufacturing unit for making missiles, mortar shells, and explosive devices in the area surrounding Ma'arat al-Nu'man. The Iraqi forces continue their successful military operations to expel the ISIS out of Iraq, while the commander of the 14th Brigade has announced cleansing areas and villages south of Baghdad as the cleansing operations continues. With this, we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, www.syriaonline.sy. Stay with us, the latest in business and market news after the break. And Syria's envoy to the UN says the Syrian government is a key part of combating terrorism of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra. And the United Nations Security Council calls for enhancing support for Iraq. Syria reiterates commitment to agreement on disengagement demands, ending the Israeli occupation of the state in Iraq and Syria terrorist organization. Units of the Syrian armed forces continue to launch successful military operations against the terrorist organization in several areas across the country, inflicting heavy losses upon them. In face of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and expresses unconditional support for the UNDOF mission in Syrian Arab Golan. And in Russia, Moscow does not expect invitations to join the international alliance against the Islamic